ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
Hey, welcome to another video. So today we're going to be going into the life and legacy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. But before I begin, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, link is in the description, and consider becoming a join member to further support the channel. Otherwise, let's jump straight into it. So, several years before Hugo Damask's birth, his father, a Force-sensitive moon named Car Damask, who worked as a middle-ranking banking clan agent, met renowned starship designer Rugnis Nome, or Darth Tenebris, by chance on a Highport Space Center. Tenebris, in his capacity as reigning Dark Lord of the Sith, Darth Tenebris, had been searching for the right apprentice to train for the sole purpose of eventually possessing, through the virulent midichlorians he had dubbed maxichlorians, in order for his consciousness to survive until the creation of the Chosen One, who would be seized by the Sith. Years after meeting with Damask, Tenebris discovered another Force-sensitive moon, a lower caste female, and conscripted her as a disciple, for she was not strong enough with the Force to be considered for apprenticeship. Tenebris, using Bith, scientific methods, had predicted that the offspring of Damask and his disciple would be strong in the Force. For this purpose, he tasked his moon disciple to seduce Car Damask and bear him a child. Born on Megiddo, sometime between 200 and 100 BBY, the son of Car Damask, who had become the planet's administrator for more than 10 years earlier, and his wife, Hugo Damask, was named after his grandfather. Growing up in a doomed city on a perpetually frozen and sparsely populated planet, under the overly attentive gaze of his mother, Hugo had a very atypical childhood for our moon. She recorded every detail of his upbringing, encouraged him to talk with her about even the most furtive of his thoughts, and provided playmates for him, observing his interactions with them and interrogating him about his feelings regarding each specific youngling. Before his 5th birthday, Hugo discovered that he could manipulate the Force by using it to apply the feelings of his playmates. He eventually tested the limits of this power by using a very potent mind trick on a moon youngling he had grown to dislike, convincing the boy to commit suicide by jumping into a courtyard from a high window. Damask's mother instructed her son to keep his powers secret and confided in him that they shared the gift. Damask's parents handed him over to Nome as a youngling in return for a career advancement for Car, presumably arranging for the Dark Lord's shadowy intelligence network. Tenebris took the child as his apprentice, the one he intended to eventually possess, naming him, at some unknown point, Darth Plagueis. Plagueis left Megiddo for the first time in his life, and began his life as a Sith. 5 years after handing his son to the Dark Lord, Car Damask was appointed director of the Treasury branch of the intergalactic banking clan, realizing his lifelong dream of wielding real power within the IBC. His wife disappeared without a trace. 5 years after that, Plagueis learned the truth of Tenebris's machinations that led to his birth. Car Damask eventually rose to the top of the IBC as a chairman. Darth Plagueis traveled the galaxy with his master, masquerading as Rugnis Nome's young accountant, while the two carried out the Sith plan for spreading discontent to ripen the galaxy for their rule. Despite his travels, Plagueis became acquainted with one of the backwater of the galaxy. In the years to come, he would feel at home in the run-down spaceports, seedy tap cafes, and rough cantinas common in the Rim. Around the year 104 BBY, Plagueis undertook the trial of visiting Cursed and fighting its natives with Darth Tenebris for the first time. Plagueis later told his own apprentice that his first mission under the tutelage of Lord Tenebris was undertaken in the 25th year of his apprenticeship, at some point after 99 BBY. Tenebris tasked his apprentice to murder Carid Santh the Elder. The assassination was accomplished by means of telekinetic strangulation. During a banquet on Korolog, the Sith Lords took advantage of the fact that bloat eel was served in order to blame Santh's death on the chefs. Following this trial, Plagueis veered from the Sith path, as often happened with apprentices when they first discovered the potency of the dark side. Plagueis later claimed to Palpatine that he had returned to the Munilist to meet the rest of his clan. As the son of Car Damask's wife, however, he was never accepted by his half-brothers and sisters, who saw him as an interloper and sought to have him disinherited. Soon afterwards, Car Damask fell gravely ill at a relatively young age for a moon, and it was discovered that he had a rare congenital defect in his tertiary heart, and that he had passed on to his children with his first wife. Plagueis, having been born to a different mother, did not carry the gene, and he watched as his siblings and clan mother spent millions of credits on a geneticist to help cure the condition. Plagueis claimed that he had hired the geneticist to conduct phony treatments, and that he took pleasure in his siblings' early deaths, inheriting the wealth they had tried to deny him. Palpatine suspected that the story was embellished to goad him into killing his family. Plagueis later admitted that only some of it was true. Regardless to the circumstances, at some point, Darth Plagueis inherited the Damask fortune and took over the Sojourn gatherings from his father. Gatherings were clandestine annual meetings of politicians, the leaders of various trade organizations and cartels, and even gangsters, hosted by Damask Holdings on the moon of Sojourn. Higa Damask transformed the gatherings from the elite secret club it had been under his father into a Sith tool to influence the most influential beings of the galaxy, in order to prepare the Republic for the submission to an enlightened elite promised by Darth Tenebris. During their long years together, Tenebris did not invest in properly training Plagueis as a Sith. Instead, he sent him on various missions he judged pointless as a distraction, and cultivated his apprentices' unprecedented talent for midichlorian manipulation, all the while making sure that the moon would only apply it to the preservation and extension of his own life, thus ensuring that he would live long enough for Tenebris to possess the body of the Chosen One. Plagueis developed his powers in the Force, and in the mundane world largely on his own, and indeed took them further than his master believed. Tenebris also took on a second apprentice, a Bith to whom he bestowed the name Darth Venomous. Although Venomous was apprised of Plagueis' existence, Plagueis was kept in the dark. He believed he was his master's sole apprentice, in accordance with the Rule of Two, a rule he had come to resent. In 67 BBY, Plagueis, in his role as Higa Damask, secretly negotiated for the Trade Federation to accept the expansion of free trade zones in the Outer Rim territories, even though this would cost it some of its shipping monopoly and expose it to competition from startup companies. In exchange, the Trade Federation received full voting privileges as a functional part of the Trade Federation. Though the leadership remained disgruntled at the loss of some of its monopoly, meanwhile, Plagueis advised the Intergalactic Banking Clan to invest in Outer Rim and Trans-Perlemian shipping to take advantage of the new arrangement. 67 years before the Battle of Yavin, Darth Tenebris learned of a cortosis deposit on the planet Beldemek, and personally went there to survey it with his apprentice, a Shredroid, and an M2 mining probe, provided by Subtext Mining. What neither Tenebris apparently nor Plagueis knew was that the probe had been sabotaged by an unknown party, with Subtext complicity. Inside a cave on the side of a steep escarpment of the shore of the Northern Sea, the two Sith Lords landed their craft, a ship designed by Tenebris himself, and set out to survey the cortosis vein, using envirosuits to protect them from the deadly heat. Tenebris ascribed significance to the mission, as he believed that two Sith Lords mining cortosis at the apex of the Rule of Two era amounted to the closing of a circle that had begun with Darth Bane, the Sithari of legend, starting on the path towards darkness in the Apatros cortosis mines. The Enterprise soon came to an unexpected end, however, when the droid reported that the mining probe had discovered a pocket of highly combustible variant of lethane directly beneath the borehole. Tenebris ordered the droid to have the probe deactivated, but it failed. The probe overrode the droid's commands, After the two Sith unsuccessfully tried to damage the probe using Force lightning, they hastened to return to the grotto, where they had landed the ship, leaving the Tedroid behind. Plagueis made sure to let it know that it had been useful before running away. As the two Sith ran through the superheated caverns, Plagueis noticed that his master was uncharacteristically distressed, as if he sensed something alarming in the Force. They had just made it to the grotto near the surface, when the gas explosion caught them. Tenebris conjured a barrier to shield them from the fireball, and when the ceiling began to collapse, he used the Force to protect the ship. It was then that Plagueis had the impression of hearing the Force whisper to him at that moment, and had come to claim his stake to the dark side, and lost no time in contemplation. He betrayed his master by bringing the huge slabs of stone down on him using the Force. The rockfall, however, also buried their ship, trapping them both. Racing to Tenebris' side, Plagueis tried to comfort his master. The Bith went along with his apprentice, Charade, and conferred the mantle of Sith Master to him. Plagueis, accepting responsibility for his action, informed Tenebris that his death would mark the end of the Rule of Two, and that he would escape the grotto even without the ship, and then broke the Bith's neck, killing him. Both Plagueis and Tenebris had waited a long time for that moment. The latter had hoped that his apprentice would have made his move years earlier, and was happy to finally be allowed the chance to implement his secret scheme, while the former had wanted to carry the grand plan to completion alone, without being burdened with the formalities of the Banite system. As Plagueis reached out in the Force to study Tenebris' dying metachlorians, the maxichlorians carrying the Bith's intelligence slipped out of his body, undetected, and infected a wound on the moon's lower back, causing by a rock or some other projectile. As the maxichlorian virus propagated inside Plagueis' cells, Tenebris accessed his apprentice's power of foresight, the powers he had to give up in order to code his intelligence to the retrovirus. What he witnessed horrified him. Instead of providing access to the Chosen One, Darth Plagueis died at the hands of his own apprentice, the Shadow. After the retrovirus completed the task it had been engineered for, the infection of all the cells in Plagueis' body, the Moon Dark Lord lost his powers of foresight. Tenebris, after slipping out of his apprentice's body in panic, remained trapped as a disembodied essence in the cave. Plagueis lost time of where he was at after the murder, immersed as he was in the Force in order to study his master's dying metachlorians. When he regained his composure, he discovered that he had been injured. After accessing the damaged ship, he realized that he could not repair it, nor could he use the Force to reach the oculus that led him to the surface. So he set to work on removing the rubble from the ship using telekinesis, and adding the rocks to a rubble pile he could climb to reach the surface. After he had completed his task, he entered the cockpit and retrieved his travel bag, which contained, among other things, his lightsaber, a change of clothes, and a comlink, and also took Tenebris' lightsaber and comlink. He changed, and after reassuring himself that the scene of the crime actually showed no evidence of a crime, but rather of a simple starship crash, Plagueis left the cave. Relying on a map in Tenebris' comlink, the Sith Lord set out in search of the nearest city with a starport, located a few hundred kilometers to the south of the grotto, taking care to avoid contact with the Khanme, the planet's indigenous inhabitants. When night fell, the Dark Lord took shelter in a shadow cave, and as he replayed the events of the previous day in his mind in an effort to fall asleep, he sensed the presence of a being of near equal power to his. He considered that it might be Tenebris' spirit come to hound him, as legend claimed had happened to Darth Bane after he desecrated the tombs of the Dark Lords. Yet Plagueis, confident that he would outlive any usurpers to his rule of the Sith, did not allow this premonition to worry him, and fell asleep. He awoke, and resumed his course before sunrise. Famished, having caught little sleep with an infected wound and tormented by biting insects, Plagueis was in bad shape, but he immersed himself in the dark side and ran. Resisting the urge to attack the lower-caste Khanme, of the nearby dwellings for sustenance. He sated his hunger on bats and dead fish washed ashore. As he reached the city, Plagueis had a vision of the future, a future of war for Baldemic. In the starport, the Mun looked around for an appropriate ship to stow away in. After finding one to his liking and recording its registry number LS4473 in his comlink, he sneaked into the spaceport authority building, escaping the notice of the sleeping Conmay night shift guards, and found the registrar's office. He sliced into an office computer's control network and called up information on the ship he had selected. Out of the Ord Mantle, captained by a Togruta woman by the name of Ellen Law. The starship was scheduled to launch in the morning, bound for several Auruli sector planets, with a cargo of fresh sea life kept within refrigerated containers that had cleared customs. It was within such a container that Plagueis sneaked inside the ship, taking advantage of the moon ability to regulate blood flow to the hearts in order to survive the freezing temperatures. Once the crew discovered the stowaway, Plagueis promised to Captain Law that he was prepared not only to offer full recompense for the cargo he had spoiled, but moreover to reward them handsomely in exchange for passage to Munilist. He chose not to divulge his identity, however, and most crew members treated him with distrust. The deal eventually went sour, and Plagueis killed everyone. Captain Law first mate Makap, the pilot Blur, the navigator Simasali, and the crewmen Duzuto, Wandu, and Pepe Rosh all fell to Plagueis' lightsaber. He only spared Law's droid, 11-4D. Much to Plagueis' displeasure, he was unable to sustain the metachlorians of the crew members he butchered. Plagueis ordered 11-4D to set a course for the coordinates he provided, and retreated to the captain's quarters. The droid then tended to the festering wound of the Dark Lord had received in the cave, and served him food and water. The ship arrived at Deep Space Demolition and Removal, owned by Damask's ally Boss Cabra of Black Sun. There, he ordered that the ship be sealed and slagged, and requested a change of wardrobe and a fueled piloted ship to Munilist. He arrived on Highport Station with 11-4D several days after he had been expected, and was welcomed back by Larish Hill and a retune of Damask Holdings member accompanied by Ishani's Sun Guards. He also had a chance encounter with Chairman Tonith of the IBC. During the gathering on Sojourn, Plagueis met with Gardula the Hutt, Senator Pack's team of the Grand Protectorate, and Quayhuk of the Council of Elders. Gardula requested financial aid to restore the Bunta Eve Classic pod race circuit on Tatooine, and Plagueis agreed to put her in contact with agents of the Bank of Arago. Quayhuk wanted Damask's Holdings to lobby for Yinkor's representation in the Galactic Senate, though Plagueis was more interested in taking the measure of the Yinkori's rumored resistance to forced suggestion. Plagueis then clashed with Pack's team over his support for Gardula. Team feared a new pod race course would undercut Malastaire's revenues, and while Plagueis indicated that he would support an increase in rates for Malastaire's fuel exports to offset the loss, Team angrily retorted that a rates hike would benefit Damask Holdings and the Trade Federation far more than it would him. Finally, Plagueis met with Gosim representatives of Subtext Mining. After threatening them for causing the death of Darth Tenebris, the Gosims revealed the presence of a massive plasma reserve recently discovered under the city of Theed on the mid-rim world of Naboo that could be highly profitable for Damask Holdings. Plagueis chose to spare their lives, ordering his Sun Guards to transport them to the most remote world they could find in the Tingol Arm in case he needed them again. After the gathering, Plagueis was informed by his Sun Guards that an intruder had breached the retreat's security. The Dark Lord sensed that this was the work of a Force-sensitive being, and set out to challenge the trespasser in the forests of Sojourn. Originally, he thought it was a Jedi, but was proved wrong when attacked by a Bith wielding a crimson-bladed lightsaber. Caught by surprise, Plagueis momentarily believed this to be his deceased Master Tenebrous, and then mused that it might be an artificially created offspring. But the Bith claimed to have been selected by Tenebrous as a Sith apprentice, under the moniker of Darth Venomous. Venomous told Plagueis that he had planned to execute his master's last command, to kill Plagueis, and legitimize the title as Darth. There was a short but fierce duel, so as to better prepare his apprentice for the fight against Plagueis, Tenebrous had taught Venomous the same fighting style the Moon was proficient in, so that he would have an advantage when they faced each other. Damask originally had trouble fighting this new foe, but eventually gained the upper hand and disarmed Venomous, using both his and the Bith's weapon to force him to his knees. Darth Venomous then offered to apprentice himself to Plagueis, but the Moon had other plans for him. He forced Venomous to poison himself by ingesting a coma bloom, and then ordered his sun guards to locate the infiltrator's ship and move his body to Abara. This was with the intention of using the Bith as a test subject in his midichlorian experiments. An investigation of Venomous' ship revealed that he had kept an eye on several Force-sensitive users as potential apprentices. With the comatose Bith safely inside a Bacta tank in Abara, Plagueis set out to eliminate them and secure his position as the reigning Dark Lord. Accompanied by 11-4D, he traveled to Liana and Collider's casino in Liana City. With the help of the casino's security, Plagueis and 11-4D discovered the subject was a Shiido, skin shifter, which they followed across the city after they parted ways with the security of the casino. When the Shiido was changing from an Akashan to an Unger or a Gotal, 11-4D shot the Shiido in the base of the brain and brought him to the dark corner. Plagueis inquired that the Shiido is the reasoning for the Shiido transferring the winnings he gained from the casino to Carad Santh, upon which the Shiido told the Moon that Santh was in debt to some Black Sun Vigos. Plagueis let them go, with his damaged cranium, after recommending him to gain some last winnings and make himself a new life. Plagueis and 4D visited Salakami, where they found an Ikotachi prophet that was sharing her insight on the Republic's fall and the Jedi Order's fail into turmoil. Plagueis ascended to the prophet's event stage and interrupted her speech. After recognizing and greeting him, he informed her that she had been chosen without her knowledge by Venomous, and that her message was disturbing the Moon's cause. Although she attempted to convince the Moon that she would undo her speech, Plagueis instead fatally electrocuted the prophet before utilizing a mind trick on her followers to make his good escape. Soon after, Plagueis visited Bedlam and its sanatorium, where he learned that one of the Force users selected by Venomous had recently escaped with the aid of a psychologist. Plagueis flew to Abraxan, and after his droid informed him of a Force user who had killed dozens of beings there. At Abraxan, Plagueis met Jedi Master Nikata and his Padawan, Lobuk, who were investigating the mysterious murders, while hiding his Force abilities to avoid detection by the Jedi. Plagueis confronted Lair, identifying himself as a Sith Master. Plagueis informed Lair that the Moon would take him as a Sith apprentice, as he could eliminate the investigating Jedi. Plagueis then watched from a concealment as the Jedi struck Lair down in a brief duel. In 65 BBY, Plagueis, under his public name of Higo Damask, traveled to Naboo to inspect the situation for himself. During this time, Naboo was at the peak of election season, and the candidates for the throne were divided between a conservative faction which wanted Naboo to remain an isolationist Republic member world, its resources exploited only internally and not by external megacorporations, and a liberal faction that wanted to fully integrate Naboo into the Galactic Republic. The candidate of the latter faction, Bone Tapalo, secured the endorsement of both Damask Holdings and the Trade Federation by promising to open Naboo to trade, which would allow them to profit from the plasma resources. Plagueis explicitly involved in the Trade Federation in the construction of a new spaceport for Theed to export the plasma to reconcile them to the earlier free trade zone deal. He also sought to use the planet as a future base of operations. Bon Tapalo's opponent was supported by staunch royalists and traditionalists such as the Kosinga Palpatine, patriarch of House Palpatine, and Naboo representative Vidar Kim, influential figures in Naboo's politics. Plagueis eventually learned that Tapalo had an informant in a rival campaign who provided him with vital information. His agents discovered that the informant was a 17-year-old student in the legislative youth program called Palpatine, the son of a man who stood most fervently against Tapalo and his ilk. Kosinga Palpatine. Eager to know more about the young man, Plagueis convinced him when they met at the legislative program's Theed headquarters to give him a tour of the town in his prized speeder. From this first encounter, Plagueis learned much about the young aristocrat. He was interested in politics, but shy to admit it. He had a modest fondness for art and desired for his own homeworld to be open to the wider galaxy. Most notably, Plagueis learned of the young man's severe estrangement with his father, which had been going on for years and years. Impressed by the young man's ambition, intelligence, and motivations, Plagueis offered to use him as a spy to secure Tapalo's election and Damask Holdings' interest on Naboo. Palpatine accepted the offer on one condition: he would report to Plagueis alone and directly. This led Plagueis to consider that Palpatine saw him as a father figure he never had, but he too was intrigued by the young man. For 2 standard days after leaving Naboo, Palpatine was constantly in Damask's mind. After a falling out with Senator Pack's team of the Grand Protectorate over Damask's support of Gardulla during the Phobos Memorial run on Malastare, Palpatine began to consider for the role of figurehead Supreme Chancellor that would bring the galaxy under the rule of the Sith. Darth Plagueis to a young Darth Sidious. Tell me what you regard as your greatest strength, so I will know how best to undermine you. Tell me of your greatest fear, so I will know which I must force you to face. Tell me what you cherish most, so I will know what to take from you. And tell me what you crave, so that I might deny you. Immediately after landing on Naboo, a stranded month after his first visit, Plagueis and his retinue of Damask Holdings and IBC members were detained by a group of security guards. The Moons were forced to remain in one of the spaceport's holding areas for about an hour, after which time 2 palace guards arrived to escort the Magister to a waiting giant speeder. Damask was taken to Convergence in the Lake Country, where he met Kosinga Palpatine. Kosinga, who had noticed the friendship between the Magister and his eldest son, demanded that the Moons stay away from Naboo, and that Damask specifically stay away from his son. Plagueis, undeterred, traveled to Hana City on Chandrila to meet with Palpatine, who was on the planet participating in a month-long retreat sponsored by the Legislative Youth Program at the time, and updated him on the situation. The young man was furious at his father's attempt to meddle in his affairs, and his fury buffeted Plagueis as he felt it in the Force. Palpatine demanded help and advice, to which Plagueis replied that the young human could use this incident as a means of emancipating himself. After some back and forth, Palpatine revealed to the Magister that he sought ultimate power, and Plagueis told him that he was willing to be his ally in this quest, provided that he free himself of all restrictions, chief among them his family. The Moon then related the story, a carefully put together thing of fact and fiction, of his own emancipation. He told Palpatine that following his father's deathbed advice to use whatever means were necessary to protect his interests from less enlightened beings, he had orchestrated an elaborate ruse to poison his family and inherit the Damask fortune in its entirety. In reality, Plagueis was coaxing the young human to confront his father and break the barriers he had built to hide his true nature, In fact, he had approached him on Chandrila so that Cosina's spies would spot them together, making the confrontation between father and son inevitable. All went according to Plagueis' plan, and as Palpatine was preparing to leave for Naboo upon his ship, one of his father's security guards came to escort him to the family starship. Palpatine murdered his family soon after the starship entered hyperspace and contacted Damask, who promised him that all evidence would be destroyed, leaving nothing to link Palpatine to his family's disappearance. Plagueis now saw the young man as insidious, ambitious, and arrogant by nature, as well as completely lacking in empathy, ready to join the Sith as his apprentice. In a cabin aboard the starship, Palpatine knelt before his new master and swore his loyalty to the Sith Order, and Plagueis bestowed upon him a new name, Darth Sidious. Soon after the murder of his family, Sidious began the first stages of his training, designed to break him as an individual in order to remake him as a Sith, under Darth Plagueis. The master promised to the apprentice that, although his training would be severe, they would be free of the rule of two, breaking the cycle enacted by Darth Bane. They would neither harbor any secrets from each other, nor experience any jealousy or mistrust in their relationship, thus serving the dark side in concert. After Sidious began his training, he inherited the Sith Archives, a knowledge bank containing 1,000 years of knowledge passed by master to apprentice. When Sidious read the archives, he noted that Mother Talzin, Saurus Sin, Malgus, Bane, and Plagueis would find little common ground if they shared their knowledge, as they focused on their own dogmas. Sidious learned from Plagueis over the course of decades, during which Plagueis taught his apprentice everything he knew to prevent the power he had amassed from being lost forever. His training included hunting on Boyoyant, combat with battle droids on Hipori, and the ritual killing of native warriors on Cursed. During Sidious training, Plagueis gave his apprentice access to the Sith holocrons. Plagueis' lessons involved forcing Sidious to face his fears, denying him pleasures, and taking from him the things that he loved. He taught Sidious that emotions such as envy and hatred, though necessary to master the dark side, were simply means to an end of casting aside usual notions of morality for the greater goal. Plagueis also lectured his apprentice on the means of taking power, with the eventual goal of control over the galaxy. By 54 BBY, Plagueis and Palpatine were maneuvering to raise Ars Varuna to the throne of Naboo, encouraging his plans to establish a space fighter corps to allow Naboo to deal with the Trade Federation from a position of strength. When Varuna became king, Plagueis planned to lead him into a destabilizing confrontation that appeared to be of his own making. However, Varuna and Bontepallo's policies were still fiercely opposed by Senator Vidar Kim, who planned to vote against the bill to seat numerous Trade Federation-controlled star systems into the Senate. Kim's behavior became more intense and erratic after the death of his entire family in an airspeeder accident on Kadara. Kim became convinced that his opponents Topallo and Varuna had been behind the deaths of his family to force his early retirement. He devised a far-fetched plot to lead his only living son, the Jedi Knight, Roar Kim, away from the Order, to carry on the family lineage. Returning to Coruscant within a month of his family's accident, Kim was angered when his only remaining son refused him, reaffirming his oath to the Jedi Order. In 52 BBY, convinced of a conspiracy, Kim outlined to Palpatine his plan to reveal Topallo and Varuna's corruption to the Jedi High Council. While in Coruscant, Kim had arranged a meeting with his son, with the intention of swaying him to the cause and getting him to investigate on Naboo. Plagueis and Sidious came to the conclusion that the senator had become too much of a liability. Plagueis saw Kim's death as an opportunity to send a message to the Galactic Senate of the growing disenchantment of the outer systems. Sidious arranged with Sate Pistage to have Kim killed on Coruscant by a Maladian assassin. A week later, Kim was riding in an open speeder, with his last remaining heir, when the hired assassin found a round at the car, killing Kim before committing suicide to evade capture and interrogation by the Jedi. Plagueis was involved with discussions with the Kamonians about the possibility of creating a clone army to one day destroy the Jedi Order. Plagueis had initially hoped to produce ymca soldiers, believing that their immunity to many force powers would give them an advantage over the Jedi. However, Kaminoan geneticist Carole pointed out that the ymca's natural aggression would be extremely difficult to control in a military environment and interfere with their ability to obey orders. Later that year, Plagueis attended a meeting on the Outer Rim world of Sereno, hosted by Count Vimek. Also present at that meeting was a small group of Jedi: Jocasta Nu, Sifo Dyas, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Dooku. Selenon and Serrano were in a dispute over the placement of a new hyperwave transceiver in Colonan space that would expand the reach of the HoloNet into the corporate sector. In compensation for the fact that placement of the repeater would necessitate changing in hyperspace trade routes, Selenon had announced that ships entering Selenon space from the systems of the Upper Hydean Way, including Serrano, would be required to pay substantial transit taxes. Plagueis privately hoped that the mediation would fail, citing controversy. Damask Holdings would then withdraw from funding the transceiver and the project would collapse, leaving systems in the Tingen Arm feeling victimized by disagreement between two wealthy Republic worlds and intensifying disenchantment in the Outer Rim. Plagueis was more interested in taking the measure of Count Dooku, who was an increasingly dissatisfied critic of the corruption of the Galactic Senate. Plagueis felt if he could recruit Dooku as an insurance policy against the possibility of losing Sidious. After hours of talk, a brief recess was called for. Plagueis took the opportunity to speak with the Jedi, engaging in a heated debate with Qui-Gon Jinn, who accused Damask Holdings of fomenting discontent in the Outer Rim in the name of profit. To Sifo Dyas and Dooku, he spoke of impending conflict for the Republic in the future, discussing the possibility of a split in the Republic between the core and the outer systems. Dooku admitted to the Senate's corruption and despaired for the possibility of correcting it. Sifo Dyas was circumspect, not wanting to admit to the possibility of war out of his loyalty to the Republic. Plagueis realized that he had to destroy the Jedi. The Sith must exploit their sense of righteousness and obedience to the Republic, making them appear to be the enemies of peace and justice rather than the guardians. He then considered that rather than create an army to fight the Jedi, he might instead have the Kamonians create an army that would fight alongside the Jedi before betraying them. Preparing to exploit Sifo Dyas' fears about the future of the Republic, Plagueis was about to tell him about the cloners on Kamino that could rapidly raise an army for the Republic. However, upon seeing Jocasta Nu approach, Plagueis felt the dark side warn him not to speak of it, and he quickly ended the discussion. A short while later on Coruscant, Plagueis introduced Dooku and Sifo Dyas to his apprentice, Sidious. Prior to the latter's address to the Senate in his public persona of Palpatine during a vote on sitting several client systems of the Trade Federation. During their discussion, they were spotted by Senator Pack's team, who realized that Palpatine and Damask were working together. Team had just expected Palpatine to vote against the Trade Federation, but on orders from both King Bon Tapalo and Plagueis, the former wishing to placate domestic critics of Naboo's deal with the Trade Federation, the latter planning for his new member worlds to be caught in between a republic that heavily taxed them and a federation that exploited them to foment discontent and pave the way for a future secession crisis that would destroy the Republic. Palpatine declared that Naboo would abstain from the vote, tipping the Trade Federation towards victory. Also in 52 BBY, Plagueis attended Larish Hill's Order of the Canted Circle. Many influential beings attended the event, which also attended the gathering, including many moons from Damask Holdings and from the IGBC, Larish Hill was standing at the end of the circle, wearing black robes, which 10 other moons also did. The initiation ceremony would begin with the high official joining Hill on a circle and placing around his neck the Order's signature pendant. That ceremony was offered to Plagueis 20 years prior, but Damask rejected it. The event's aims were narrow, and the rituals were allegorical, filled with secret phrases and handshakes. Although Plagueis understood the need to instill members with some furtive fraternity, he did not risk having the high officials know about his past, as it could unravel his secret identity and plans. Larish Hill's past had been exhaustively shared, even the decades he had worked with Damask. As Plagueis had just returned from the short holo-transmission with Sidious, Plagueis was filled with triumph. The Sun Guards in the event were leaving to kill the Grand Protectorate. As members of the Candid Circle entered the building chatting with others, 11-4D rotated its head towards Plagueis to alarm him of danger. Without warning, the high official presiding over the ceremony gave a downward tug to Hill's pendant, severing his head and throat. As Hill died, several other officials and members threw off their cloaks, revealing their true identities as Maladian assassins. These assassins began to throw dozens of decapitator discs, cutting down numerous moons within moments. 11-4D and Plagueis were both badly wounded by this abrupt attack, with one disc severing Plagueis' trachea and blood vessels on the side of his throat. He used the Force to clamp shut his wounds and prevent unconsciousness, before beginning to attack the Maladians with the Force. Simultaneously, State Pistage informed Palpatine that the Maladian faction had accepted a contract by the Grand Protectorate to carry out a major contract on Coruscant, involving someone of Damask Holdings. Realizing their target, Palpatine and Pistage swiftly made his way to the Order of the Candid Circle's location, where a heavily wounded Plagueis was lashing out with the dark side against his attackers. The two managed to defeat the assassins and save Plagueis' life. When Plagueis ordered Palpatine to call the Sun Guard, Palpatine denied this request and told him he knew who had ordered the attack and that he would deal with it personally. Darth Plagueis had survived the Maladian attack with grievous injuries. A considerable part of his lower face had been taken off by a decapitator disc that had also severed his trachea and several blood vessels. In order to survive, the Dark Lord had been forced to wear a type of transpirator, which had covered his face below the nose. One standard month after the attack, Plagueis summoned Sidious to Abora to reveal his true nature of his studies and experiments to his apprentice. For the next 20 years, Damask lived a life in his laboratory, devoting all of his energy to the study of the midichlorians, while Palpatine devoted himself to the political machinations of the last stages of the Grand Plan. Additionally, Sidious began training his own apprentice, Darth Maul, under Plagueis' watchful eye. The moon found the Dathomirian Zabrak to be useful to the Sith, since he had been brought to Sidious' hands by his mother as a baby. At some point after Plagueis exclusively devoted himself to his studies, writing everything he learned of in a book that Sidious would call the Book of the Sith, Darth Plagueis sought to understand the Force in a purely scientific context, doing away with the trappings of mysticism he believed the Jedi had corseted it with. He accepted the classification of the Force's aspects into three categories: the Empyrean, equivalent to the unifying force, the Anima, equivalent to the living force, and the Pneumia, the conscious thought as expressed in the Force. His focus was midichlorians, which he believed benefited from a uniquely strong connection to all three aspects, and could be used to master life and death. However, the three aspects could exist entirely without midichlorians. Apart from the extension and creation of life through midichlorians, Plagueis sought to explore such extreme and unusual applications as the direct manipulation of space-time and continuity of consciousness after death, going as far as to discuss the essence transfer technique. He traveled to the Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban, seeking contact with the long-dead Sith. but found none in the tomb of the Hakagram Grash or on the throne of Sorzus Sin. As he bombarded his ship to leave the planet, however, he had a vision of the admonishing spirit of Marka Ragnos. The long-dead Dark Lord challenged Plagueis' claim to the title and rallied against the plan to dismantle the traditions of Korriban, but offered no answers to any of the moon's questions and inquiries. After this experience, Plagueis remained unconvinced about the reality of life after death of the body. The manuscript also included his thoughts on the Mortis legend, in which section Plagueis claimed that creating the Chosen One, not to save the Jedi, but to be an extension of his will, would be a trivial matter once he had mastered the art of manipulating the midichlorians. The surviving manuscript concluded with Plagueis' interpretation of the Sithari prophecy as a description of his achievements, even though he rejected the concept of prophecy. Around the year 42 BBY, Darth Plagueis finally took Venomous' life, and then resurrected him and killed him again, repeating the process until the Bith's organs gave out, and he finally died. Both Sidious and 11-4D were present. Sidious and Plagueis then entered a meditative trance, and managed to tip the scales of balance in favor of the darkness. Plagueis attempted to go one step further, and attempted to create life by mentally reaching out to the inhabitants of the galaxy, an act in direct violation of the nature of the Force. Plagueis and Sidious attempted to will a being of their own design into creation, pouring their malicious intent into waves through the Force to countless midichlorians spread across the galaxy. The experiment did not yield fruit, however, as Plagueis perceived the Force growing silent to his probing. Immediately afterwards, Plagueis' test subjects began to succumb to various diseases. As he set most of the survivors free, some of the animals he had experimented on adapted to the Forest of Sojourn. Plagueis had developed a theory that the Force was actively opposed to the Sith's efforts, and he saw each setback in this light. In 33 BBY, Plagueis and Sidious provoked a key conflict in order to advance their goals. They urged the Yinkori themselves new admissions to the Republic, into an aggressive war which concluded with multiple victories for the Sith plan. The Yinkori, a race immune to mind tricks, were thought by Plagueis to be a good potential host and trainers of a secret cloned army, which he planned to use to destroy the Jedi. Though this would not ultimately be the case, the resolution of the Yinkori uprising still proved to be of great benefit. In terms of simple bloodshed, the conflict saw the deaths of 7 Jedi, one of whom was a member of the Council. But of greater long-term value, the telepathic manipulative immune Yinkori was eliminated as a threat to the rise of the Sith, by seeing them defeated and isolated to their own world. But perhaps most significantly, the Yinkori incident critically undermined the chancellorship of Elis Valorum. This created the circumstances necessary for Palpatine to ascend to political supremacy in the Republic. By 33 BBY, Sidious was busy fomenting dissent in the Outer Rim as part of the Grand Plan's goal to pit the Republic against disgruntled star systems in the outlying regions. Plagueis was kept apprised of his apprentice's efforts, but seldom took part in the attempts, preferring to continue his experiments on midichlorians. However, when Sidious sent his own apprentice, Darth Maul, to the prison Cog Hive 7 to track down influential arms dealer Iram Radiq, to covertly manipulate a rogue Force-worshipping cult, the Bando Gora, in order to acquire a weapon in which to kill Darth Plagueis, Plagueis took an interest in the mission. He sent an IBC agent named Vester Slipfer to monitor Maul's progress. Ars Veruna requested Palpatine's presence on Theed, which interrupted his journey to the Riadu summit. Palpatine arrived at Theed and went directly to Veruna's palace. When he arrived, he sat in a table directly in front of the king, which welcomed him. Veruna offered Palpatine many beverages, which Palpatine enjoyed and consumed. Most of the most corrupt of Veruna's supporters in the electorate were present at the meeting. Everyone but Palpatine laughed maliciously. At Veruna's right sat Alexei Garin, head of the Black Sun crime syndicate, and to Veruna's left, Gardula, There was many Bando Gora terrorists in the room. Varuna and Palpatine engaged in a conversation regarding the latter's goals at the summit on Eradu, although Palpatine attempted to cloud his motives by saying it was good of Naboo. Varuna told Palpatine that he was aware of his plans with the Trade Federation, again clouding his motives. Varuna attempted to draw him out. He told Palpatine that he had some of his men present when Palpatine offered the Naberries to present her daughter to the coming election. Varuna told Palpatine that the little girl would not dethrone him. However, Palpatine continued to deny it. Varuna informed Palpatine that he would no longer be the senator of the Carole sector. Instead, Lego Kun. Palpatine attempted to suggest Janos and Greedalgus, but Varuna dismissed this suggestion and told Palpatine that he had information to ruin him, as well as to ruin Damask. Varuna finally informed Palpatine that he would not be seeing Damask again. Plagueis and 11-4D began to kill every test subject in Sojourn. As Plagueis and 11-4D killed beings, they erased data from all computers and devices and turned them into scraps. After every subject was killed and every computer was erased, they prepared the scimitar and contacted the Sun Guard to go to Thysus. When they were leaving the moon, the flotilla began to bombard Sojourn. Although the scimitar could not be detected by the flotilla's sensors, various volleys of laser fire almost hit the ship. One of the flotilla's attack ship was racing to the surface. However, the scimitar was able to evade it. The forests, fortress, and everything on the moon's private moon burned and was destroyed. Plagueis and 11-4D raced to real space and witnessed the Black Sun, Bando Gora, and Gardulla's forces using a nuclear device to destroy Sojourn. The Sith Lord and his assistant escaped the doomed moon. The scimitar docked on one of Jabba's ships, and they were safe, protected by Jabba. Plagueis and 11-4D narrowly survived the nuclear bombardment of Sojourn, after King Ars Varuna attempted to have him eliminated with the aid of Alexei Garen's Black Sun, Gardulla the Hutt, and Kamari Voss's Bando Gora's terrorist cult. Fortunately, Plagueis was intercepted by Jabba the Hutt in his personal ship, Star Jewel. Plagueis then revealed his miraculous survival through a communication by Jabba to a terrified Varuna, who promptly abdicated his throne and fled Theed in an attempt to escape from the Sith Lord. When Varuna went into hiding in the western reaches of Naboo, he was discovered by Darth Plagueis and Sidious, who enacted a plan to kill him in retribution for the failed assassination attempt. Sidious suggested that they send Darth Maul to kill him, but Plagueis wished to attend to Varuna personally. Plagueis secretly traveled to the ancient Nabooian manse of the Count of Vis with his droid 11-4D, and silently broke into Varuna's bedroom, waking the old man. Sitting across from him, Plagueis held Varuna in a force choke, preventing him from calling his security chief, Maris Magneto, for help. The Sith Lord confessed to having been behind Tapalo and Varuna's ascension to the throne, and divulged his allegiance to the Sith, striking terror into Varuna. At the same time, he manipulated the limited amount of midichlorians in Varuna, slowly killing him. The former king pleaded for Plagueis to spare him, so that he could be of further use to the moon, but Plagueis insisted that Varuna was already helpful by dying, which would increase the Sith Lord's power. Beyond satisfying revenge for the second assassination attempt on Plagueis' life, Varuna's death also served as further fuel to inflame the Nemodians enough to agree to invade Naboo, as per the grand plan. Livid about the Galactic Senate's recent shipping taxation legislation that promised to impact not only the galaxy's free trade zones, but also the Trade Federation, Viceroy Newt Gunray, somewhat reassured by Darth Sidious' confidence that Naboo was significant enough to ensure galactic interest in their planned blockade of the planet, was now sufficiently prepared to execute the Sith Lord's directive to seal off all trade with Naboo. But because of recent threats and information breaches that included the Monkar-Pavin holocron incident, but also the Nemoidians' bungled compromising of their secret droid army foundries on Eos and Alaris Prime, Darth Plagueis ordered Sidious to postpone the blockade until after Coruscant's political rally for Supreme Chancellor candidates at the Perlemian orbital facility. In preparation for the coming conflict that would be called the Clone Wars, Darth Plagueis, who was the planned conflict's guiding engineer, ordered that these recent breaches be partially dealt with by relocating Bactoid armor to the planet Geonosis. Once Darth Maul was finished dealing with the loose cannon that was Monkar-Pavin incident, the Zabrak assassin was recalled by his master to the off-world Perlemian facility, where he was to deliver the recovered Sith holocron to Sidious himself, but where, quite by accident, the Sith crystal was instead delivered by Lorne Pavin himself to Sidious' public persona, Palpatine. Maul, from whom the holocron had been reacquired by pursuing Pavin in the orbital facility's docking bay, concurrent with the political rally's proceedings, had nearly failed Sidious in catastrophic fashion, but Pavin, in flight from the enraged Zabrak, had delivered the dangerous article containing incriminating information about the Trade Federation's imminent blockade into the trusted hand of the senator from Naboo himself. With this potentially devastating political mine now safely diffused, Sidious issued the blockade order to Newt Gunray, who, in prompt fashion, after setting his freighters in place, warned the Republic that any attempt to break the embargo would be met with deadly force, and that if the new regulations were not rescinded, the Naboo populace would starve. Sensing the extreme delicate and volatile nature of the situation, Supreme Chancellor Valorum consulted with the Jedi High Council that continued to faithfully support him, and clandestinely arranged, unbeknownst to the Galactic Senate, for the two Jedi ambassadors to enter into negotiations with the Trade Federation that had, in utter defiance of Republic law, launched the blockade. Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi were the Jedi selected to attempt to appease the Nemoidian anarchists. Valorum knew that any other kind of Republic response to the matter would be bogged down or stalled in legislative procedure and red tape by the Senate. The secretive collusion of the Chancellor with the High Council blindsided Plagueis and Palpatine, who had been confident, because of the unsavory events of Galadran, Yinkor, and Baltazar, but more especially on Azmaru and Aradu, and the resultant restrictions placed on the Senate by the Chancellor's use of the Jedi Order, that neither the High Council nor Valorum would ever be so foolish to again risk a measure so bold. Both Sith Lords were also very much aware of the pesky Jinn-Kenobi duo that had become the nemesis of the Nebula front at Dorvala, Azmaru, and on Aradu. Thus, in retaliation for the Jedi Order's most recent intrusive gesture that sought to circumvent, but which, in any case, dramatically diluted the hoped-for impact of the Sith-forced embargo, and which also now threatened to uncover the existence and political ambitions of both these powerful figures, the Dark Lords accelerated their plans, ordering the Trade Federation to immediately kill the Jedi envoys and to invade Naboo instead. They tampered their new mandate by reassuring Viceroy Gunray that henceforth the Republic would not intervene. Indeed, the Sith would take measures now to take their actions legal. The grand plan now required that Naboo be secured in preparation for the planet being annexed by the shipping cartel. All of these converging power plays and reversals combined to prompt Plagueis' solemn resolve that it is the will of the dark side that we finally reveal ourselves, to which Sidious concurred, "I will see to it, Maul is ready." It had been at the political gathering at the Perlemian orbital facility, hosted by Supreme Chancellor Finis Valorum, above Coruscant, that Plagueis had approached Sifo Dyas, who was in attendance alongside Jedi Masters Yoda, Mace Windu, Adi Gallia, and Joruus C'baoth. With the galaxy seemingly on the brink of civil war, Sifo-Dyas' concerns had become all the more urgent, and the Jedi Council was apparently no more willing to listen to their Jedi colleagues' warnings of doom than it had been in the past. As such, Plagueis preyed on the Jedi's fears, convincing him that a military capable of defending the Republic needed to be created now, while there was still time, to avoid the Republic a fighting chance. Plagueis and his alter ego persona approached Sifo-Dyas, just as he would have done 20 years before on Sereno, and openly professed once again that a growing darkness was approaching. Once a harbor of skepticism, Sifo-Dyas now agreed fully with Damask's claims, and the cloaked Sith Lord advanced a step further. He informed Sifo-Dyas of cloners on Kamino that could grow an army, one that Damask himself was prepared to fully finance, and hold it in reserve until it was needed. The Jedi Master, still hesitant to take bold action, was at the very least persuaded to accept Damask's argument and would seriously ponder the matter. Following the Battle of Theed and the death of his former apprentice Qui-Gon Jinn, Dooku resigned from the Jedi Order and later fell to the dark side of the Force, becoming the new apprentice of Darth Sidious. It was at this time that Sifo-Dyas, having settled his mind, approached the Kaminoans and requested a clone army for the Republic. With the funds provided by Damask Holdings, Sifo-Dyas paid the Kaminoans, and Dooku recruited the storied bounty hunter Jango Fett, with his recent successful bounty of apprehending Bando Gora leader Kamari Vosa, to serve as the clone army prototype. Little did the Jedi Master know, however, that Sidious and Dooku had learned of this clandestine measure taken under Damask's counsel, and together they plotted the steps to ensure Sifo-Dyas' demise. As Palpatine's star rose in the Coruscant political scene, Plagueis carried on his life extension research by 34 BBY. He believed that he was close to a breakthrough that would save himself and his apprentice from death. During the Naboo crisis of 32 BBY, Plagueis and Palpatine became aware of the powerfully Force-sensitive Anakin Skywalker, a human slave boy from Tatooine who stood as a virgins in the Force, and who had been born around the same time that they had saturated the galaxy with the dark side a decade earlier. Plagueis became convinced that the midichlorians, unwilling to comply to his insidious, unnatural usurpation of the power of the Force, had struck back in retaliation, conceiving a savior to ultimately destroy the Sith, the prophesied chosen one whom Plagueis had blasphemously endeavored to create or father in the past. Palpatine informed his master of the boy's arrival in Coruscant, and Plagueis felt compelled to meet Anakin for himself. He was able to gain access to Palpatine's suite, where Anakin was staying, by using a mind trick on one of the Queen's handmaidens, who nevertheless informed Damask that he had just missed the boy. For the first time, Plagueis began to fear that the Sith were in danger of being undone, and found himself responsible, as he interpreted Skywalker's creation as the Force striking back at him and Sidious. He had previously boasted about being able to create the chosen one of Jedi prophecy, as his master had expected of him. Now he made it his priority to stop the boy from falling into the hands of the Jedi. As Plagueis spied on the departure of the Jedi and the Queen from Coruscant, wherein he caught his first glimpse of the boy, he received a vision of a cyborg clad in dark armor and a dark helmet, confirming his fears, that this boy would change the course of history in the galaxy. Not wanting the Jedi, therefore, to train the boy, he ordered Sidious to have Darth Maul kill Qui-Gon, in order to prevent his catastrophic Force vision from becoming a reality. Sidious had added insurance, for he knew well of Kenobi's reputation and status, that he stood on the brink of Jedi knighthood, and might take the boy as his own apprentice, ordered that Master and Padawan both be killed. Giving the Sun Guard the night off, Plagueis retired with Palpatine and 11-4D to his penthouse suite, where in celebration, Plagueis and his apprentice drank Salustin wine. Sidious complimented Plagueis on his part of the plan, and told him that he would endeavor to live up to Plagueis' expectations and fulfill his responsibilities. Sidious rehearsed the speech he would give the next day to the Senate after he was elected chancellor at Damascus' request several times, saying that the Republic had been intact for a millennia, thanks to largely invisible beings whose accomplishments needed to be brought to the light of day, such as Higo Damask. As the night wore on, Palpatine amended and corrected his speech with Plagueis, critique while drinking more and more wine, intoxicating Plagueis with the Solstian foodstuff. Although Plagueis attempted to stop drinking, his apprentice did not let him, forcing the moon to intoxicate himself to the point at which he started to sleep. As Plagueis fell asleep, Sidious attempted to leave, but stopped when the dark side calling out to him to kill his master. The human from Naboo then betrayed Plagueis by throwing force lightning at his master, which woke up the moon. While mocking Damask, Sidious threw more and more lightning at the Sith Lord, destroying his breathing device and making Plagueis suffocate. Although Plagueis had denied his death, he feared it could happen, and attempted to stand up and fight. However, he fell onto the couch thanks to his intoxication. He was slowly killed by Sidious' tangle of force lightning, eventually suffocating and losing his life, one that he believed he would never lose with his midichlorian studies. Darth Plagueis' body released an explosion of dark side energy that could be heard as a ripple throughout Coruscant and knocked out Sidious. Plagueis' body did not dissolve, and was left behind. With the attention of the galaxy focused on the new Chancellor, the death of Higo Damask barely went noticed by the galaxy at large, a galaxy from which he had completely removed himself in the last 20 years. A few hastily prepared obituaries mentioned only the scant information about his life that was available publicly. Members of the intergalactic banking clan refused to release any information about Damask's funeral or about the disposition of his holdings. Darth Sidious cremated his master's body and kept his master's ashes in one of the 2 spirit urns he kept at the entrance of his private office on Coruscant. Though Plagueis purportedly taught Palpatine all that he knew, and Palpatine himself had also participated in the earlier failed attempt at manipulating midichlorians that resulted in Anakin's birth, Palpatine himself was unable to fully master Plagueis' teachings to cheat death through the Force, and was forced to rely on cloned bodies to hold his spirit instead. Sidious spoke little of Plagueis to his apprentice Darth Tyrannus, who himself knew the moon as Higo Damask. Sidious used Plagueis' story to seduce Anakin Skywalker into becoming Darth Vader. The tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, Chancellor Palpatine's Sith legend, told of Plagueis' abilities to create and preserve life. According to Palpatine, the tragic irony was that he could save others from dying, but not himself. Skywalker, seeking Plagueis' power to save his own wife, Padme, later became the apprentice of Sidious. In the following decades, Sidious only gave Vader brief hints about Plagueis. At some point after Palpatine brought the galaxy under his heel by reorganizing the Republic into the First Galactic Empire between 19 and 18 BBY, the Dark Lord included a manuscript fragment from Plagueis' scientific journal on the nature of the dark side and the progress of the Abora experiments written by Plagueis' hand around 45 BBY into his Book of the Sith, showing respect for his master by including him among the handful of Sith who advanced the cause and left behind documents detailing their approach to the dark side. Sidious later archived the Book of the Sith in his secret storehouse at Mount Tantus on Wayland. At some point, even after Plagueis' death, some of the members of a Sith cult known as the Apex Society believed that Colin Islow, the leader of the cult, was being guided by the spirits of deceased Sith lords such as Plagueis. Sidious eventually achieved immortality through cloning, although he was ultimately defeated by Luke Skywalker. When historians in later years were unable to find much information on Plagueis, they suspected that Sidious had destroyed everything about his master. The Wavlud manuscript, one of the few sources of knowledge for the Jedi on the Sith, and Sidious revealed information on Plagueis to the Galactic Alliance and New Jedi Order. It is not known whether the information revealed about Plagueis identified him as the same individual as Higo Damask. Another was his scientific journal, included in the Book of the Sith. which was kept intact by Sidious and even jotted down his own personal notes on the subject. In 24 ABY, the Book of the Sith and Plagueis Journal were recovered from Mount Tantus storehouse and were passed to Grand Master of the New Jedi Order, Luke Skywalker. Skywalker proceeded to scribble his own notes onto it before passing it on to the New Republic Intelligence Service. Even by 36 ABY, however, public knowledge of many details of Plagueis' life was still uncertain. The writers of the Galactic Alliance official history could chart only the broad strokes of his life, and were even uncertain to the exact date of the murder by Sidious. So what do you guys think of the entire Legends history of Darth Plagueis the Wise? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you haven't already, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, join the Sith Citadel Discord, links in the description, and consider becoming a join member to further support the channel. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.